I haven't had good luck with my prior recordings, but I feel like this is the one. This is the one that's going to work. All right, go ahead and post your questions in the chat as we go, or unmute yourself and ask a question as we go. This should take about 30, 40 minutes, and then we just have everything after that is question time. So hopefully this will go pretty quickly and be informative, because that's the most important thing. We haven't done RISE testing for a while. The last time anyone administered a RISE end of year test was 2019. A lot has happened since then. And of course, we have new teachers who've never seen the system before. So we're going to start with an overview of what RISE is. And we'll talk about what a test day looks like and how you would get a test started and what kind of accommodations are available for students, what will happen with scores, and what kind of policies you'll need to keep in mind. And then we'll have Q&A. So what is being tested on a RISE test? So RISE is what we call our grades 3 through 8 summative test in Utah. It's a test that we wrote for ourselves. Utah teachers get together every year and get paid, which is nice, to write items to add to our summative item bank. So I do hope you get a chance to participate in that if you haven't already. And the tests are focused on the essential English, math, and science standards in each grade level. Now, the science tests don't start until grade 4. So third graders are taking a math test and an ELA, English Language Arts test, and that's it. And then starting in 4th grade, you do English, math, science. 5th and 8th graders have an additional writing test, which is shorter than the others. And that's what we consider the RISE tests, the end of year tests. Now, science grades 4 and 5, if you teach grades 4 and 5, as you well know, you have brand new standards this year. So that means you have a brand new test because the test is written according to the standards. So every time we come up with new standards, we need to write a new test. And that's going to affect you guys because one, no one will have encountered this test before. It's its debut. And two, that means it's going to be longer for you guys to get your scores back for grades 4 and 5 science. And because you have to go through a standard setting process every time you administer one of our tests in Utah for the first time, we take all of the tests and get teachers together and go through all of the results. And that's how we develop the cut scores for what's considered proficient. So that's going to take over the summer. But all the other tests except for grades science or grades 4 and 5 science, you're going to get your scores immediately because we've done all of that process for the other tests. The other thing to know about RISE tests is the way that we've built the interface is so that the test is adaptive. That means students might start out on the same items or similar items, but as they progress through their test, they're going to get different items. So you'll look around the room and students will be working on different things. That's because the test is adaptive and your next question is served up based on how you answer the question that you're on. That's nice because it means the test can kind of adapt to the student's level of skill, but it also means that students cannot skip any items. You have to answer the item that you're on. So one thing to go over with students is if they don't know the answer, they can make their best guess and go back and review that guess later. By the end of the session. When I say review it later, I mean by the end of the test session. The other thing to keep in mind about RISE is once you log out of the test for that day, even if you're not finished, if you log out of the test and you stay logged out for 20 minutes, that kind of puts a barrier in your test where you're not going to be able to go back and review all that prior work when you log back in. So in a RISE test session, most people do 2 sessions per test. Just remember that as the teacher, as you're winding down the session for the day, you'll need to tell students, okay, check your work, make sure that you've answered all your questions and reviewed your questions for today. We're not going to come back to these questions tomorrow, and we'll start again tomorrow. That is in the directions for the test. So if you're reading the directions, you're in good shape there. So as I said, we have 4 tests: English language arts, writing, math, science. And science starts in grade 4, and writing is only grades 5 and 8. The tests take by default 90 minutes. And the timing is something that is managed by the teacher or the proctor, not the test interface. This isn't a timed interface. Students aren't going to see a clock counting down because we know that would cause anxiety. So this is treated like it's another classroom assessment, meaning we know how many items are on the test. We can set goals for about how long that should take. It should take 90 minutes, and then we can help students manage their time to make sure that they're getting to a certain number of items, in their first session and then in their second session. If students don't finish in 90 minutes, they can have up to 135 minutes. So that kind of breaks down into 3 45-minute sessions instead of 2. So basically, if students don't finish in 2 sessions, they can have a third session. But we really don't want to see any student taking longer than 135 minutes, because that's 2 hours and change. That's a long time to spend on a single test. So we definitely want to help students manage their time and get finished within that, because no student should be spending longer than that on a RISE test. For the writing test, we budget 60 minutes by default. It's a 1-hour test. It's one prompt. Students get one prompt. We don't know ahead of time which prompt they're going to get. It could be argumentative or informative. And they sit down, they have a couple of articles related to their prompt, and it's just a one and done. They write a response to the prompt, and then that's it. Sometimes that's broken up into 2 sessions as well, but the purpose of that is not so the students can work on their prompt outside of the test. The purpose of that is just to maybe give students a break. So the outer limit for the writing test is 90 minutes. So we want pretty much everyone to be done responding to the prompt in 60 minutes. And then if they need up to 90 minutes for writing, that's okay, but we don't want to go beyond that. The testing window is very wide. It's already started, and it goes until the last week of May. So anywhere in there, your school can choose to administer RISE tests. Or if it's up to you as the teacher, you can plug that in anywhere in the schedule in the last few months of the school year. You can administer these tests in any order. And as I said, they can be paused and resumed at any time. In your school's testing schedule, you will need to account for assessing virtual students. These tests, these end of year tests, cannot be administered remotely. The state board decided that in the fall they weren't going to pursue remote end of year testing. So that means any student who is taking a RISE test, they are coming to the school to take it. So your school will need to create sessions where virtual students can come in and maintain their distance and still have the opportunity to take a RISE test. The other thing to keep in mind this year, because it is a special year, we have an opportunity to learn survey that is going out as part of RISE testing. This survey should be done 135. Thanks for asking about that, Lori. It's 135 minutes is the outer limit. Most students should be done in 90 minutes. So one thing to keep in mind is the opportunity to learn survey that's going to be administered right before the math test. And you can see a draft of the questions here. It will be administered in the same interface. So it will, it'll look a lot nicer than it does on the screen right now. This is just the draft, but these are the questions that are going to get asked. And they're important questions to contextualize the RISE results this year, because we need to, what happened with students learning this year. So students are going to go in and they're going to tell us what happened. They're going to tell us, were they learning in person all week or just part of the week, or were they a remote student? How many times were they quarantined? Was it often? Was it never? How do they feel about their learning this year? Do they feel like they were able to learn normally? Do they feel like they learned a lot? Do they feel like they didn't learn? That's important to know in context of their RISE scores. And then what kind of tools did they have? or what access did they have to instructional tools like Canvas or Google Classroom, or an adult who could help them? And then did they feel like they had good internet access and a computer they could use? All of those things are really important to understand in tandem with understanding what their end of year proficiency is on the math skills they've been learning all year. So that's why we're doing an opportunity to learn survey. And I think it's actually before. I thought it was after, but I think they switched it to before the math test. So just account for that. You're going to spend 5 to 10 minutes before your math test taking this survey. And of course, since it is a survey, it's not a test, you can definitely help students answer those questions. If a student, in 3rd grade is like, I don't know, what's this word? It's quarantine. And you can explain to them, oh yeah, remember you had to stay home for, those 2 weeks. And you can just tell them how to answer. So to review, the RISE testing sessions should be hopefully pretty flexible. You need to follow the timing guidelines as the proctor to help students finish in that reasonable time frame of 90 minutes. But you can complete the test in multiple sittings. You can have them pause and resume. Actually, it's up to 99 times, so students can pause and resume several times. And then the sessions are flexible. Students, once they start a RISE test, I know if you've come from another state, maybe, there are rules around their test sessions in those other states where students can't leave the test session. They have to do it in one sitting. That's not the case for the RISE test. It should be managed like you would manage any other assessment that you've done in your classroom. Students can take a break, they can go to the bathroom, they can get water, they can do whatever they normally do in the instructional environment during their RISE test. So let's get you looking at the resources on the RISE website. Go ahead and go to utahrise.org. That's our RISE website for teachers. And that has the test administration manual, the blueprints, the scoring rubrics, all the resources and training, and a couple of tools that I think you'll really like, namely the benchmark previewing and the training tests. So let's take 1 minute. And I'm going to pause for 1 minute and have you head over there. Make sure you've got that tab open. All right. That was our 1 minute. Hopefully you've made it over to utahrise.org and had a chance to look around. One thing that you should go hopefully straight to is the test administration manual. Let's have everyone pull that up. If you'll look under resources, under user guides, the test administration manual is there, and that is the Bible for RISE testing. Everything I'm saying in this training, everything that you need to know about the RISE test is all in that manual. The accommodations, the test times, what happens with the scoring, the directions for starting a test, all of it is in there. So if you're on this, go ahead and venture over to the user guides and grab a copy of that administration manual. I was just going to put a link in the chat, but you know what? I think you guys can follow the pictures. So resources, user guides, test administration manual. That's something that will really help. I'll pause for 20 seconds. Give you a chance to go grab that. Okay, hopefully you've gotten a copy of that test administration manual from the site. The next thing we're going to do is look at TIDE. The TIDE is the test management side. And so that's where you would go to look up which students aren't done with their test tickets, making sure that students are in the system and that the test is assigned to them, which if they're in the system, the test is assigned to them because the tests are assigned, if you're elementary, they're assigned automatically by their grade level. So every sixth grader in the system is assigned the tests, English, math, and science for sixth grade, just because they're a sixth grader. And then if you're a seventh or eighth grade teacher, your students are assigned tests based on whatever course they're taking. So if they're an eighth grader taking secondary math 1, they have a secondary math 1 test. If they're a seventh grader taking eighth grade honors English, they have an eighth grade English test. So whatever courses students are enrolled in Skyward, their test will be generated to match. And you can look up your rosters here and print test tickets over here in the green menu where it says print test tickets. So this is a good moment for you to check your login, because you do need to log in to the TIDE site. And if you haven't ever logged in to RISE this school year, then you need to reset your password. And let's take about 2 minutes and have you do that. You can just click Forgot Password on the site, and it will send you an email, and you can click the link in the email. So let's pause for 2 minutes and everyone log in. – 30 more seconds. All right, that was 2 minutes. So let's move on. Hopefully everyone had a chance to request their reset or log in. And once you're in TIDE, what I'd like you to do is go to the print test tickets option and go ahead and practice printing test tickets. If you're in an elementary, it's likely that your testing coordinator is going to do this for you. But if you're in secondary, it's more likely that you are printing your own. So go ahead and see if you can pull up your rosters under Print Test Tickets and click that print button and get a copy of your test tickets. One thing to keep in mind is because this is such a crazy year and our enrollments and rosters have changed so much, the RISE system and the state data system actually is allowing for a lot more flexibility in terms of what rosters students are attached to. And that helps with all the different rostering solutions students have tried this year, or schools have tried this year, but it does wind up producing a lot of ghost enrollments, meaning that you will likely see when you print your test tickets students that aren't in your class anymore, and that's okay. That doesn't affect their test at all. It just means that you have a ticket to throw in the trash. So it's a little wasteful in terms of paper, but it does open up um, some flexibility for schools in all the different ways they've been rostering kids this year. The only thing I'm really concerned about is if you look at your roster and a current student is not on there. Well, you should always see your current students. You just might see some extra old enrollments as well. Oh, great question, Lori. So if you go to utahrise.org, then click on Tide, you'll be able to log in. Okay, so let's take about 1 more minute to pull up your rosters. Oh, thanks for asking about that, Veronica. Having students on your roster won't affect your test scores. Your rosters or the RISE system is set up to show you test scores for any student who is enrolled with you. The whole purpose of the reporting is to give you access to scores. So as long as you're getting access to your current student scores, we're going to call that a win. And if you ever have questions about if you don't see a student scores that you would need to see, then please let me know, because we want to make sure you have access to all the scores for your students. And that includes students who move in. So if you have a student who moves in like the last week of May, that score should follow them and appear on your roster as well. So that's the whole point of the reporting system, is to make sure you get access to all the scores for students who are enrolled with you. Oh, thanks for asking about that, Lori. I'm not sure what your password is. You'll need to use password reset. All right, let's move on from here. And I do have a tutorial that you can use, because anything I'm showing you now, there is a 2-minute tutorial that you can use to review it later. And you can find that on my YouTube channel, which is YouTube Brooke Anderson JSD. And the RISE playlist is here. So you can see there is a 1 minute 43-second tutorial on printing test tickets. So you don't have to remember everything you're seeing right now. And just as a heads up, testing coordinators are going to do probably 90% of any tasks that need doing in TIDE. For classroom teachers, they really just do 3 things. They need to be able to check a student's login. They need to be able to print test tickets as needed. And they might need to be able to update a student's test settings, because you can go in and change the color contrast. For example, for a student who needs, black background, white text, or a different color background, or a large mouse pointer to help them see and track on the screen, you can go into the TIDE site and update those visual settings, and then their test gets presented to them with those updates. So the YouTube channel is there. So it's just YouTube Brooke Anderson JSD, and it will have playlists for all the different assessment systems that we use at the end of the year, RISE, Utah Aspire Plus. And if there's a task that you need to do and you don't see a tutorial, feel free to email me and say, can you make a tutorial on how to do this? We're always looking for new tutorials that will be helpful. So the next part of the RISE site that you should be able to log into is the test administration site, where you actually launch a test session. And for RISE, you have to, every time students go in and sit down to test, you need to launch a fresh test session for them. This isn't something where we just schedule one session and then students keep coming back to that one session. The way this system works, the sessions expire, they're not permanent. So if the session is idle for 20 minutes, it just closes itself. So we know we are launching a test session every time students sit down to test. And it's really easy to do. In fact, you should go into the test administration site and launch a test session. A benchmark session would be a great one to launch. You could launch a summative session, and as long as no one logs into it, it'll just go away after 20 minutes. No worries. So here are the steps for launching a test session. You click on Start a Session, you select the test, and you can select more than one test to all be presented in the same session together. And then you click the green Start button. If it's a benchmark test, it's going to ask you to label it as a pre-test or post-test, but it won't ask you that for the summative. And then the test proctor screen is up and running, and you've got your session code, which is the third piece of information students need to log in. The other two pieces of information students will need are on those test tickets that we were just printing, and it's their state student ID and their first name as entered in Skyward. And you'll want to double check on your session roster to see if you have any students with a double first name, because that's been tripping a few of us up lately. If a student is named John Michael, they do need to put in John space Michael as their first name password when they log in. So you can see once I launch the test, I get a session code, and that's the thing that you'll put on the board and have available for students to put in, and that directs them to the right test. So let's take about one more minute and have everyone launch a test session so they can see how that screen looks. Great question. If the students have a middle name, does that count as a double first name? No. It depends on how it's entered in Skyward, because Skyward has a space for a first name, a middle name, and a last name. And it really depends on what's on their birth certificate, because sometimes the parents have the two names as the first name and do not consider that a middle name. And that's the case where a student has a double first name. It's also to keep in mind students have punctuation in their first names. So if they have an apostrophe or a dash or anything like that, that is part of their password as well. Capitalization doesn't matter, but the punctuation and the spacing does. All right. That proctor screen is going to be something you'll need to keep up the whole time when students test. Oh, thanks for asking. You'll go to utahrise.org. We had a great question in the chat. Where do I launch a test? Go to utahrise.org, then test administration. And so once you launch that screen, that proctor screen, you need to keep it open the whole time students are in that test session, because if your computer dies or you accidentally close the tab, students are going to get kicked out of their test. That proctor screen is their connection to the test. And we know that if we close that screen or close that session, we have to launch a new session with a new session code to get students logged in. So make sure that your computer has your charging cord with you or is plugged in. Make sure you're not going to accidentally close that screen. It's not a big deal. It's just annoying if you do, because students can just log right back into the test, no problem. But again, that's a couple of minutes of annoyance that we didn't want to have. So make sure you provide that session ID to students, get them logged in. As they're logging in, they're going to see a message that says waiting for TA approval. And you're going to see a list of students on your screen that you need to approve to enter the test. That's a really great classroom management moment because it means you can go through all the bustle of getting kids logged in and then have that nice stopping point where you could say, okay, we're all logged in, great, I'll click approve, we can all move on together. Or you can just click approve as they are logging in and let them read through the directions. But that's up to you. But I really like having that stop point where we all have to get logged in and then move on together. And then on that screen, it's going to list all of your students as they're taking their test, how far they are in their test, the questions they've answered, if they're paused. And the other really nice thing is if a student is idle, if their test hasn't been, if they're not moving along in their test and they've been idle for 2 minutes, their name gets bumped up to the top of the list. So you should see really easily on your proctor screen which students might need a check-in. Oh, thanks for asking. If you have a test ticket for a student who has moved out of the class or moved online, do you need to worry about it? Nope. We'll just discard any tickets for ghost enrollments, and that doesn't affect the student's test at all. So if you wind up with extra tickets, don't worry about it. So a test day, what you should expect to do is going in, logging into that RISE test administration site. You want to launch the session first, get the code on the board, and the session can include multiple tests. You see there's a select test buttons right here. So if I'm testing and a student walks in from my neighboring class and says, I didn't finish my test, can I finish with you guys? Of course, I can just select the test, launch it, and they can use the same session code we're already using to log in. So that makes makeup testing really easy. I can include any test I want in a test session. I'd also want to make sure I had some materials available for students, their test tickets, their Chromebooks, and the door sign. So those test tickets will have their state student number and their first name is entered in Skyward, which is their login information. The Chromebooks, you do need to expect a test on Chromebooks. That's where the test app called Secure Test Browser is set up. It's in the app menu of every student Chromebook. You should be able to pick up any student Chromebook and it's right there, Secure Test Browser. If you're planning on using anything but a Chromebook, you need to talk to your school tech as soon as possible because I don't think they've set up the Secure Test Browser anywhere else. I also have a door sign. We don't want our test sessions interrupted because we do want students to be able to focus and concentrate. The other things to have are you can print a session roster along with printing the test tickets, and that will just give you a list of all of the students' state IDs and first names, so that if a student loses that test ticket in the 1 minute since you handed it to them, you can just look on your roster and help them log in. Students will also need headphones or earbuds because the English test has listening portions, but every test has text to speech, meaning students can have questions and question options read aloud to them. So you'll want every student to have access to some kind of audio, earbuds, headphones, they can bring their own. They should also have access to scratch paper, and the scratch paper can be blank, lined, or graph. It can't be a graphic organizer made by you, but if you've taught students to make a graphic organizer, that's great if they make their own, as long as we're handing them a blank sheet of paper of some kind. You'll also need the scripted directions from the test administration manual. There is a script for starting the test and ending the test session, and we want to make sure that we're reading those directions because it goes through screen by screen how to get through the directions screen and actually start the test. And it also means every student gets a consistent set of directions for their test session, which we like. And please remember in elementary, because the standards are written, that math is done without the aid of calculators. That means there are no calculators on the elementary math tests either. The second half of the sixth grade math test will have an on-screen calculator, but students will not be able to have a handheld calculator unless they are a sixth grader with that in their IEP. So if you have any rules about calculators, you can email me. You can also go to the resources on the Utah RISE site, and you'll find that there's a calculator policy and sample calculators there. Because if you're a middle school teacher, you might want to look through the sample Desmos calculators that are going to be embedded in the test. So before the testing session, you'll want to have those materials ready to go, and you'll also want to cover or remove visual aids from around the room. And it's up to your judgment as to what needs to be covered or removed. We know these tests are testing the essential standards in English, math, and science. So you'll need to look around and judge, is this something that's going to answer a question about one of my essential standards? And if it is, then it gets covered or removed. For example, I taught 8th grade English for a long time. And so my students learned about commonly confused words. And when I tested them, I had commonly confused words posters on my wall. And so I would cover or remove those because I wanted to test them on what they could retrieve from memory. And I knew that would also likely be on their end of year test. So those posters got covered or removed on the end of year test as well. So once you've got your room set up, you've got your materials, you are logged in, and you've got the session open, you are ready to go. And then as students come in, remember, since this is a test, we want their cell phones and their smartwatches to be put away. And you can just direct them to check their sound. They do have to check the sound as they log into a RISE test. So that is part of the logging in process. And then when they're logging in, you'll want to read those directions to the students, walk around and actively proctor, answer questions about the interface. Whiteboards as scratch paper, that's fine as long as it's blank. Yeah, a good question. Can you use a whiteboard, little mini whiteboard as a scratch paper? Yes, as long as it's blank. And as your students are testing, they will probably have questions about the interface or things like that. You can always help students navigate the interface. We're not testing them on the interface. We just know not to answer the content questions for them. One of the nice things about this interface is every single question has a little menu, and the top option in that menu is a tutorial. So if you use a training test, you'll see that tutorial in the menu, and you can use that to help students figure out how to answer the question and use the tools. And the other nice thing for the writing test is that there is a scoring rubric included on the test. So my students took the writing test because I was in 8th grade. And they would ask, is this long enough? Is this enough? Is this good enough? And so I would have them open the scoring rubric rather than evaluate their work for them and ask them to use that to evaluate their own work. And just remember, students can take breaks as needed as they go through and do their test. At the end of the session, remember to direct them to review their work because they're going to pick up where they left off, but they're not going to be able to go backwards the next time that they log in. And their test is being saved as they go. They don't have to save their work. They don't have to worry about losing their work. It's all being saved as they go. And after the test is completely done, then you would want to make sure you've collected and destroyed all of their scratch paper. Now, if you're testing across 2 sessions, one tip is to print out the test ticket itself on a blank piece of printer paper, 1 ticket per page, because then you have a ticket and scratch paper in one, and the scratch paper already has their name on it. So you can collect it, when they're done with their first session and hand it back to them at the beginning of the second session, and that's easy. So preparing students to test, we have several options. The number one is a training test. If you look on utahrise.org, we've got training tests available, and they're available for all the subjects and all the grade levels. And you can take them online by just clicking take the training test. You can also set it up as a test experience that approximates end of year testing by launching a training session and having students log in with the secure browser. That's important if you want students to practice the routine of testing along with the interface. These training tests are public. Anyone can use them. So this is a great thing to project onto the board and work through together. And the training tests have every type of question students will see. So it's really about the tools and the interface. It's not a great review of content. If you want to review content, I recommend using the benchmarks. The benchmarks are specific to your class, and they're on one topic covered on the end of your test. So if you're a 5th grade math teacher, you have a benchmark on measurement data and geometry that you could give. You actually have several that you could choose from. If you're an English teacher, you could give a benchmark just on reading informational text. And if you want to look through the benchmarks, that's why that benchmark module previewing is available on utahrise.org. You can see what benchmarks are available for your class. And there are benchmarks that can be administered remotely as well. And I have a tutorial on that YouTube list that shows you how to do a remote benchmark. So students can take a benchmark at home if they're learning at home. All right, accommodations. We're going to finish up in the next 5 minutes. So accommodations, what about students who need more time? So any student can have breaks, extended time, and take their test across multiple days. So hopefully that takes care of most students' accommodations needs. And if you have questions about other accommodations, please talk to me, read the manual, and we'll make sure students' accommodations can reflect what they've been using in instruction. For English learners, just know there is a Spanish to English dictionary inside the test, so they can have that translation option. They can have their directions translated. Currently, the RISE test is not available entirely in Spanish, so there is going to be some extended time probably needed for students to sit down and translate the questions for themselves as they work through them. Let's talk about scoring. So the scores will be available immediately unless you're grades 4 and 5 and it's your science test. Those are the only 2 scores you have to wait for. So students will see their scores, they submit the test, and you will see the score in the reporting site as well, same day. It might take a couple of hours if a bunch of kids are submitting tests, but you will see them within 24 hours in the reporting site on utahrise.org. And there's a lot of flexible options to play with in that reporting site. You can summarize the scores a lot of different ways. And I'll send out a tutorial on how to do that as we actually have scores to look at. So the nice thing is when you're getting scores immediately, that means you can use them immediately. We can use these to plan for end of year instruction for students, differentiate based on which students are proficient and which students need some more help before the end of the year. You can use this as evidence of competency on a grade. So RISE can always help a grade and not hurt. If you're confused about what the policy on RISE and grading is, I don't blame you. This policy has changed at the state level several times in the last 5 years, but here's where we are right now. Any teacher can use a RISE proficient score to help a student on their grade. You just can't use it to hurt a grade. And they can do that. It's their own prerogative to do that. You don't need parent permission to do that. So you can use a RISE score to replace a final. You can use it to replace missing work. It's left kind of intentionally vague. They leave that to teacher judgment. What would be the appropriate way to use RISE proficiency as evidence of competency on a grade? And then students, of course, as part of our state policy in Utah, parents are allowed to opt their children out of any state mandated assessment, and the RISE is state mandated. So if students are opted out, the ideal situation is that they have an alternate assessment to take. You can require them to do that, but that means you have to produce an alternate assessment, and we may not have that available. So an alternate educational activity would work. For my students, if they were opted out, I had them work in Utah Compose while the rest of my students were taking their RISE test. And they can be in the same room with the kids who are RISE testing, that's fine. I know some schools will send kids to the library, that's also fine. And one last thing I'll leave you with is our state policy does try to make RISE as normal a day as possible. We do not put a lot of incentives on our end of year tests in Utah. We don't allow for non-academic incentives. For example, we can't do pizza parties. We don't do pep rallies for tests. We don't make a big deal out of RISE, and that's intentional because we want to treat it just like any other instructional assessment and make it as normal as possible. So if you've been thinking through how to make it a special day, maybe pause on that. If your students, I know some teachers like to give students candy or gum on an end of year test, thinking, well, that's going to help them perform better. Well, if it's a math test, they've been doing math problems like this all year. And if they didn't need candy or gum to do the math problems last week, they may not need candy or gum to do the math problems on their RISE test. So just try to think of it that way. We want the assessment experience to mirror their instructional experience as much as possible and not be a different special day. So thanks so much for hanging in there with me. We went a little bit long and I really appreciate your time. I have a Google form that I'm going to have you fill out to get some relicensure credit for participating in this webinar. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. And then it's just got 2 questions. Were you here? And do you already know your password, or are you going to know your password? Because we want everyone to know their password. All right. So many things on my screen right now. Okay. So there's the link to the Google form to just say, yep, I was here. And please let me know if you have any questions as we go through and start our RISE testing. You can reach me at brooke.anderson@jordandistrict.org. And now that we have a recorded webinar, I'll put this on the RISE Canvas site, because we do have a teacher Canvas course that goes over the same information. So if you want to review anything we've talked about, you can go to that course and you can see this webinar there and go through it. Or just, send me an email or give me a call. Thank you so much for your time. If you have questions, go ahead and stay on and ask. Otherwise, have a great day.
Brooke,
Yes.
we have a question. There are several of us in a room and we projected this up on the screen. And so how do our other teachers get to the link if it's not on every computer?
Okay. So which school are you from?
We're at Foothills.
Do you want me to should I just assume that all the Foothills grades 3 through 6 teachers were present and accounted for?
No, we're a group that we just decided to get together this morning and do it together.
Would it be possible for you to tell me now?
Who we are?
In the room? Yeah. I'll just write it out.
We could do that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me stop recording.
You want to come tell her yours?
For no good reason.